ชยันตุโพธิยามุเลสักยานังนันทิวัตโนวังตวังวิชัยโยโหหิชัยยาสุชัยมังคะเลอปราปันลังเกสีเสปัทวิปุคาเรอภิเสเกสาปมุนหาคาปาโตปโมดติสุนาคาตังสุมังคลังสุปาปาตังทิตังสุขโนสุโมโหตัวจะสุยิทังพรหมจาริสุบตังกายกรรมังวาจากรรมังปนาคินังหินังมโนกรรมังปณิทิเตบันดาคินาบันดานิกตวานลพันตาเตปาดาคิเนบาหูเดวามนุสสาจมังคลานิอาจินขมานาโสธานังบรูหิมังคลมุตตมังอาเสวนายะลานังบันดิตานันจะเสวนาปูชาจะปูเอตัมมังคลมุตตมังบุทธาสโลกธรรมเมหิจินยาสนกาปฏิยาโสกังวิราชังเขมังเอตัมคลมุตตมังเอตานิสานิกตวานสาปัตปราชิตาสาปัตตโสทิงขาชันติตันสังมังคลมุตตมันติมภวตุพมังคลังราคันตุสัพพเดวตาสัพพบุตรนุภาเวนัสนาโสทิภวันตุเตภวตุสัพพมังตุสัมปเนวตาสัมปสังฆานุภาเวนัสนาโสภวันตุเตภวตุสัพพมังราคันตุสัมปเนวตาสัมปสังฆานุภาเวนัสนาโสทิภวันตุเต
ถัดไปนะคะเรามาดูลำดับกันบ้างดีกว่า
또 소래.
근데 이제 스리랑카 구쇼즈 이거 그리 이네 콘스 페이지 딱딱 좀 요스 말이. 간단히 콘스.
추소 뭐줄 수도.
이 간단히 페르민고 간단 타일랜드 제일 스리랑카 지유.
송사르시.
나 스리랑카 간단 페이지 매버다.
스리랑카.
간단 신의 정부도 스리랑카.
Namo tassa bhagavato Buddhadasa Namo tassa bhagavato Buddhadasa Namo tassa สังโฆญาณปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆสามีจิปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆยะติตังจัตตาริปุริสยุตานิยัตถะปุริสปุคคลาเอสะภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆปุริโยภาปุริโยตักขิเนโยอัญญลิปรมิโยอนุตตรังปุญญเกตังโลกัสสามิสัจจวัจเจนะปะตุปังรัตนัตตยังเอเตนะสัจจวัจเจนะปะตุปังรัตนัตตยังเอเตนะสัจจวัจเจนะปะตุปังรัตนัตตยังสัพพิติโยวิวัจจันโตสัพพะโรโควินัสสตุมาเตปะภะวันตรายโยสุขีทีฆายุโกภวะตุสัพพะมังคลังรักขันตุสัพพะเทวตาสัพพะพุทธานุภาเวนะสัตตาสุติภวันตุเตภวตุสัพพะมังคลังรักขันตุสัพพะเทวตาสัพพะธัมมานุภาเวนะสัตตาสุติภวันตุเตภวตุสัพพะมังคลังรักขันตุสัพพะเทวตาสัพพะสังฆานุภาเวนะสัตตาสุติภวันตุเต
A great, thank you. A great sadhu for a short recitation of Pali Sutta chanting by venerable members of the community of Sangha from Thailand and venerable members of the community of Sangha from Asgiriya Temple, Kandy from Sri Lanka. A very good morning to His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all respected venerable members of the community of Sangha from Thailand, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, and many other monastics from various other countries, and many Buddhist friends, Dharma brothers and sisters around the world. Namo Buddhaya, Sapa Mangalang, Tashidale. A very warm welcome to a 2-day teaching program by His Holiness the Dalai Lama on Maha Satipatthana Sutta. Today, 17th of December, 2021, is the first day of teaching program. I'm Dhammapala, a Theravada monk from Malaysia. I'm the moderator for today's teaching program. We are absolutely delighted and honored to be blessed by His Holiness on the teaching of this very important suttas called Maha Satipatthana Sutta. We are very grateful for His Holiness, for His compassionate presence online, teaching the Maha Satipatthana Sutta for the benefits and happiness of many. In Pali, Bahujana Sukhaya, Bahujana Hitaya. The format of this 1-hour teaching program will be mainly the teaching by His Holiness and followed by question and answer from the floor. Indeed, this is the precious moment for us to learn from the great teacher, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The Buddha says in the Mangala Suttas, associating with the wise is a great blessing. Panditanang cha sevanang etang mangala muttamam. I hope you will make wise use of this wonderful and rare opportunity to ask His Holiness anything about life, meditation, practice, and cultivation. However, due to overwhelming questions from the floor and due to time constraint, we might not be able to attain all of your questions, and your understanding is very much appreciated. Now, we request the floor to mute your mic and keep the video open. Please keep the environment calm and peaceful. Listening attentively to the teaching by the Great Master, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. On behalf of all the organizers, His Holiness, I would like to introduce some of your old friends and senior monks to you. Most Venerable Dr. Waskadue, Mahinda Vangsa, Mahanaka Thero, Mahanaka Thero Sri Lanka of Sri Sambuddha Sasanodaya Sangha Sabha of Amarapura Mahanikaya, Sri Lanka. Most Venerable Nyangoda, Vijita Siri, Anu Nayake Thero, Anu Nayake of Mawalta Chapter of Siang Mahanikaya, Sri Lanka. Venerable Dr. Omaupe Sobihita Nakathero, Chief Sankanayaka for Southern Sri Lanka of Sri Ramanya Mahanikaya. Venerable Narang Panawe Ananda Nakathero, Chief Abbot of Asgiriya Maha Pirvena Kendi. Most Venerable Pra Medi Wajirodom, Venerable Wajira Medi, Chentawan International Meditation Center, Thailand. Most Venerable Pra Wajira Yanamuni, or Ajahn Achalo, he is the abbot of the Anandagiri Forest Monastery in Thailand. Venerable Sri Saranankara, Nayaka Mahathera Chief of Malaysia, Theravada Council, Malaysia. Most Venerable Kemacharo Mahathera, the Chairman of Indonesian Supreme Sangha Councils. Most Venerable Dr. Santa Citto Thera, the Chairman of Kerja Rajasa Buddhist College, Indonesia. Most Venerable Dhammaduta Thera, the Chairman of Indonesian Buddhist Scholars Fellowship, Indonesia. And the last one, Venerable Dr. Dhammapiya Mahathero, Secretary General, International Buddhist Confederation, India. Without further ado, we shall invite Chief Venerable Bodhi Nandamuni to give a welcome speech. Bodhi Nandamuni is the Chief Abbot of Wat Pa Buddhagaya Temple in Bodh Gaya. Bante, please unmute your mic, please.
Kangri Rawe Korwe Singkamdir, Pendang Dewa Malu Chung Wene, Chenre Sikwang Tensing Kasoyi, Sabe Site Badu Tenchurjik. Good morning, Your Holiness. It's my privilege and honor to see you again. Thank you very much for choosing this wonderful, precious teaching, Maha Satipatthana Sutta, which one of the main practice in Theravada countries and co-teaching of Lord Buddha. The Buddha himself says, this is the one and only way to get liberation This teaching is coordinated by your office in Southeast Asia and co-organized by Venerable Prabodhinantha Muni Luang Phoi Chiu, Wat Pa Thamachat Meditation Center of Thailand, Srivijaya State Buddhist College of Tangerang, Indonesia, Theravada Buddhist Council Malaysia, Sri Lanka Tibetan Buddhist Brotherhood Society, ASEAN Dhammaduta Projects Thailand, Tibetan Buddhist Centers Singapore and Sri Lanka. On behalf of all the organizers,
So, now can I start my talk? Okay. Nara namjuniti döndegi dönde jesu rodu chungjushing gyawe sonla jangpa memensing nanjo jola zombe gyalongshi changso chambutarla tedar ku shani kanda nirishindu dambaya chenduzane wangati jerumuchiga dendredewe tsikdi shibushin nuba chambushito dönde jesu rodu chungjushing gyawe sonla jangpa memensing 점된데기 가 되는숨 에네 디 광지 디디 가 춘주간에 싸울로심 에네 제버디 영지 도시상 투지 거진 뭐这些 견세 도선에 개성로 장바면신 에네 그스 투두게 tö든 줄을 쉬니 에네 니리신도 다 수중글로 실리샤네 에네 띵지글로 갈 칸섬지 상당히 요래 섬지지보디 상당히 요래 에네 슈셰디 에네 장주섬 상로 동야다 에네 동니기 다와 다티 자신 주주기 장주섬 에네 사무도주기 동니기 다와 에네 라브진 주주기 에네 시월에 에네 dakshanyamji 로샤디디 네 니리신도 상당히 검격이 자상가 던지셔서 개성으로 장범면신 내저 저로 준비 개론 어떤지기 다 말은 두시들이 시어요라 다 뒤터네 시 애니 쳐져서야 그래서 톱두기 지금 말에다 냠랜드 데니 지금 컨트레지기다 성려야 지금 유어로 컨트 주고요 그저자디 이 쳐져서 님돌이야 감시하라 시라 가오요 에네 다 들대 냐란데 지나서다 발리기 추진 중에 넘버 7 다디네 아니 레자기 추진 중에 다 가서 사mol로 전된대기 전장 지규리 아니 지기 떠주 잠만을 예버디 좀 더 코로나 셰슈베 그도네 아니 그나 지라마 대버쪽에서로
지라마
들이 연구요래 아니 림베기 아니 간단 도데바 아니 샘잠바 우모바 제제르레 낭세기 야 만다든지 다 용되기 요래 디디 간다 좀된데 코랑기 결혼 다금 캐는 게 스시다 스신도 레버다라 나이가 라원 차이 규치 민세네 좀된데 도 송도가 제사가 난소리야 좀된데기 제가 시서 뭐시나 라원 차상 송 전에 아니 좀된데 코랑기 송왜 까들이야 좀된데 까르스니 이지셔고 말했어 될 당시 시세네 좀된데 코랑기 송도가 제사가 말한서 아니 빨리기 취지들이 아니 사고도에 날린데 아니 렉자기 취지고 나로라 아니 좀된데 그 까르니를 그 잡아치야 시우지기다 용돼야지 사들이 인도산에 좀된데 그 까려야 지성 그 리뷰 잡아잖아 데 never dare 슈처처 라시 마도 잡아잖아 애니 슈데 지금 랜자면에 애니 대화장장 가는 거지 저기 어마리 사들이 인도 좀된데기 롱도 그때 말이야 시에 대화 토지기 또 고기를라 또 나라 차샤네 어디 좀 된데기 전장 아니 다쳐 넘름다 삼물럼지 전보다 아니 당신님지 로종도 저기 냠린체니 아니 시에는 대화 토버시니 도스유 아니 chanzo 들이 쳐줘서 도스 제체 아니 하장 가보중 다 안돼 뒤주디 내년에 지금이 시디 다티 나려야 취규 자면의 이도 삼월로 즉 투부용야지 이 떠준 자면의 요리디 이내 즉 참 가서를 선박상고치야디 취규 참여 선거 요리 다가는 신기 차고 마셔야 돼 취규 참여 선거도가 아니 무디고 자가기미 제인데 아니 빨리 취규 중에 참을로기 간다 잠닝지 냠는시야다 세번 냠는시야 샤나 차와미샤 상매 송구도가 아니 자가나리야 다래 아니 출루카디디기 차와미시야서디 쉬울 송구도가
주의디
세상 자가나리야 아니 로동자 하거든요 로동자 니글 하거든요 차와미시야다 아니 그러다 힘사스야가 처음이지야 되다. 아니 거루나스야가 참지스야디 로동자 하는 숨즈징을 떠주디 레디기도가. 세상가 다 디디 나즈 디 락지를 야가가 나로 출루 먼저 망구요래. 카시쉐 요래. 아니 이슈도 아자장. 아니 힌두 자면자 제인 자면자 chen 예버디디 참월로 자갈 투다도보도 맞아 미비다스지 출루 튼지디 미비다스 여도지 레도와 자상가 나데 자갈 전시어 전에 로디디 심벌이 뭐는지 자갈이야 아니 출루 튼지디 아니 차와메지야다 출루 튼지디 뭐는지 지수이랑 semke tingne pe kasor kiya chigi o tendishto santa teride ganazo da pale ki chuju na bozo da 아니 레자가 주요 나보서 아주 두스 투셰 다게시아 그거 좀 하장께 와서 중 엔다 나보스 저질린 오늘 됐어
라고 주의디.
지르고면도
아니 저질린 인다
말이 냐도 주의디.
네
내가 그래
견도니
이나
어디
So it's a great joy for me to have this opportunity to be with you all, venerable Sangha members, and we are all students of one and the same teacher, Lord Buddha. In my own case, every day, every morning when I get up, I recite a particular stanza which was composed by the 14th century Tibetan master Tsongkhapa. And that stanza, 4-line stanza, captures something that is very dear to my heart and also shows the level of devotion on the part of practitioners like myself towards the Buddha. And the stanza says that having taken the monastic vows as the basis for my practice, and also having engaged in the study of the great teachings of the Buddha and other masters, and then having implemented these, put these into practice through, yogic practices, I have developed this devotion and faith towards you, the great teacher, referring to the Buddha. So this really is a stanza that is very dear to my heart. And also I personally identify with the sentiments expressed in these 4 lines very deeply. I've had the privilege to be able to take the monastic vows when I was very young, and which thus establishing the basis for the foundation morality practice. And then in my own life, I've been privileged to have access to a great teacher, my main principal tutor, Yongdzin Rinpoche, who, thanks to his kindness, I've been able to be exposed to the vast teachings of the Buddha, as well as the great masters that came after the Buddha, and spend enough time, actually not a minimal time, but quite a bit of time, delving deeply into these teachings and the great treatises. And thanks also to having the opportunity to engage deeply in the practice so that I can implement what I have learned. The content of the learning for a Buddhist needs to be put into practice through meditative cultivation. And in my own personal practice, of course, on the basis of morality, one of the important practices is the cultivation of single-pointedness of mind, which is the concentration and shamatha. And because the concentration and the shamatha practice allows us to be able to have some ability to apply our mind in a focused way. So that's really a key part of the practice. And then with that kind of mental technique, the main focus really is, in my own personal case, cultivation of bodhicitta, the altruistic intention to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings, grounded in universal compassion. This is an important teaching coming from what in the Tibetan tradition we call the lineage of the profound, lineage of the vast practices. And then the second focus of my practice is the teaching on shunyata, emptiness, which is really understanding of the deeper nature of reality. And this set of teachings is referred to as teachings coming from the lineage of profound view. And then the third lineage, main focus, is the teachings coming from Shantideva, focused particularly on altruistic intention, equalizing self and others, and exchanging self and others, and expanding one's altruistic orientation of the heart. So these 3 are my main focus of cultivation. And as a result, as I deepen my own personal practice, the more I am able to gain something from these practices, the deeper my devotion and reverence to the great teacher Buddha becomes. So this is something that I wanted to share with you. And the recollection of the Buddha is something that we as Buddhists must do on a daily basis. And in my own case, that's the first thing in the morning when I do by reciting those verses. So of course, Buddha's, when we talk about the Buddha's teachings and the tradition that came from the Buddha, broadly one can say there is the Pali tradition and there is the Sanskrit tradition. And the Sanskrit tradition is the tradition that really remained and embodied in what came to be known as the Nalanda tradition of the great masters. And the Pali tradition is very well represented in this congregation today. And so when it comes to the philosophical views, we have to admit that there is a diversity of views in the teachings of the Buddha. Even in the history of the Buddhism, we know, for example, there is the emergence of what is called the 18 great schools, from the teachings of the Buddha. And these, each of these schools maintain a slightly different philosophical view. And then within India, if you look at the philosophical history, there is the Vaibhashika, Sutrantika, Chitramatra, mind-only school, and the Madhyamaka. So all of these diverged philosophical views really emerged. And in fact, strictly from a historical point of view, it would make sense because Buddha did not teach just one teaching for everybody. So, and that's why, there is in fact a statement attributed to the Buddha where the Buddha says that just as a goldsmith would test the quality of the gold by rubbing, cutting, and burning, in the same manner, you should examine my statements, the words I have uttered, and accept them on the basis of your understanding, not out of pure devotion. So in some sense, we could say that the Buddha, our teacher, has given us, his followers and disciples, a kind of a liberty, a freedom to really examine and really make sense of the content of his teachings in relation to our own understanding. And it is because of this, there historically, particularly in the Nalanda tradition, there emerged a great diversity of interpretation of the Buddha's teachings, to the point where distinction is drawn between the provisional nature of some of the teachings and the definitive meaning of some of the teachings. And so to the point where sometimes even the literal statement of the Buddha is not accepted on the surface level meaning, but looked at as a deeper underlying hidden meanings and so on. So I think it is really important to understand this overall history and also to really recognize that as Buddhists, Buddha really was teaching something to us aimed at understanding the nature of reality as it is. So the nature of reality as it is would require us to apply our mind and critical thinking to be able to understand. And so, for each of the statements of the Buddha pertaining to the truth, we can subject them to analysis. So it's not, Buddha's teachings is not something like a scriptural, has to be accepted as a scriptural authority on just a pure faith or devotion. Buddha's teaching can be accepted by examining and relating to the nature of reality and reason. So therefore, it's a very rich tradition. And once we are able to understand this, then our devotion and faith to Buddha will not be just purely a devotion and faith, but it will be a devotion and a faith grounded in reason and grounded in understanding. And this is something that I think is really important, and I want to share with my fellow Buddhists, that to be able to cultivate a faith in the Buddha that is grounded in understanding and grounded in reason. So this is something that is important. And of course, today we're living in a very pluralistic world. And in this world, the fact is there is a multiplicity of different spiritual traditions. And all of these spiritual traditions, we have to understand the place of Buddhism in the context of this plurality of world spiritual traditions. And as Buddhists and followers of the Buddha, we need to be able to identify with fellow spiritual practitioners and sometimes, sort of unite in where we can see commonality. For example, when we look at the ethical teachings of all the great spiritual traditions, there is a convergence on emphasis on cultivation of good heart, compassion, and avoidance of harm. So these teachings are universal, and that's why cultivation of a good heart, and for example, cultivation of patience, forgiveness. So these are universal spiritual values, and it's something that we as Buddhists also need to appreciate when we relate to other traditions. And in my own case, I am a deep admirer of the great heritage of India, the country where I have had the privilege to live now for many years as a refugee, as a stateless person. But India particularly is a place where historically there has been a multiplicity of faith traditions. In addition to Buddhism, there is Hinduism, various traditions of, denominations of Hinduism. There is, of course, Islam, Christianity, and so on and so forth. So there is many more than several centuries history of the plurality of faith traditions in India. And because of this, India has been able to really promote this idea of plurality, acceptance of the plurality of spiritual traditions. And this is something that I deeply admire. So the two things that I really try to share in the world taken from the Indian heritage, one is the emphasis on ahimsa, the non-violence and avoidance of harm, rooted in compassion. And then the second one is, an explicit adoption of plurality of faith traditions. So these are two important heritage of India, which I really try to share more widely. So before we launch into the actual teaching, once again, I want to express my deep gratitude to everyone who has made this teaching, organized this teaching, and also as myself a monastic member, it's a real privilege and joy to be able to be with many fellow monastics today here for this session. Thank you.
Any Darish at the Tisamtangiori, Tedalo to Segenda Session, Rangalana, never Juru Russian, Susun did a Molu, Dene, Kemevor, Tode, Tanya Tempeto, Gobonjo, Taton Goporto, something Yimigi, Draw Gumibala, Nijan, Kiversi, Tegon, Tishi, Sunji Sanjan, Dijani, Molubon, Loy, Papachi, Kuzuti, Shoyango, Gayo, Namboy, Tenekio, Namboy, Dududan, Kelung, Shudo, Kay, and the Jazu Power shot on draws. Odangadi, Kay and the Jazu Power, Yatos and Dragi, Netsoshi Yori, Page Tome, she a lamner Page Singu, Surstu, Chasa any, Co Shundi, Chig, Juzam Maimba. So Lalikani Yundu, one at Chanegi, da so the Gasha Lum the Sim Dinging never told the Churchy, Lolly Jodo de Ajigi, Yungutua. Just all any Guzu the Shayanga would get you, Mangway would tell you, do the Nickel, shoot of Gay and the Jazu Poro Children Drogan, or the shop was right out the Yomar in a shop of Tepsha, Zikitane, Drugiori.
So another point I want to share with you is that on my part, given my dedication to personal practice, there's a passage from the 7th century Indian master Chandrakirti. It is entering the middle way towards the end, concluding part of that text where he talks about how on the basis of cultivation of compassion on the one side and wisdom of emptiness, understanding the nature of reality on the other, wisdom and compassion. And he compares these two to the two wings of a bird that is, flying across the space to, travel towards the other shore, which is the attainment of Buddhahood, liberation. So it's a poetic articulation of the author's aspiration to attain Buddhahood. And on my part, I find these verses very deeply meaningful. And as much as possible, I strive on the path. And one thing that I can say is that, if you make the commitment not to leave what you have learned just as intellectual knowledge of, Dharma, but in fact, implement them into your own personal life by relating to your own mindset, on way of thinking, on your own state of mind, then we can really see a transformation, a change in ourselves. And when you are able to see the change in yourself as a result of implementation through practice, then you begin to feel a kind of almost as if you could taste what the texts are talking about, so that it does not remain just words and representation in words, but actually there is a sense of reality that sets in. So I could say that although I cannot claim that I'm actually gone quite far, but I could say that at least I have, touched the first part of the threshold of the path that is going to lead me to the other shore. And so perhaps the two wings that I'm using, the wisdom and compassion, aren't as, strong as I would like them to be, but still there are two working wings that can at least take me a little bit on the path. So the point I'm trying to make is that it is important that the knowledge of Dharma be actually made real through personal practice, so that you begin to see a change within your own mind.
So now, some questions.
Chabiti.
Oh. The Champanyesha, that day, any Michanzo Canon number 2, data took you over any that day, Shifter Shuka came into any Changzhou so doing Sati, Champanyesha she, Yanda Pong she, Zuju Kampo she. Teso Wongbonga, Donga, Changshu Yana Dun, Palang Yana Get Sa, or the Changshu So Dungi, Jordan Didi, go the Chasan Chi Kuma do Strini, Rokaji, Chuna, and Kwa Chasan Lea Chirisha. Jumden de Sung Lezen Chik Dangaya, Trusho Bimbache, Changshu So Dungi, Jordan, the Chasan Chitus. Toma Tebache. Tene Tibetan Yana Yando Sam. And some Betan, Gomu Duzane, Tasum Komsu Yamajetane, any Rimbeki, Nyamyonki, Nyamyon Degi, any Lola Jotea Chigi, or the Dosu Jugior, Judan Dosu. Jasanga Deo Kanzo, Shunin de Son, any. She guns a chose the Nezu, O Nezu, Nezu money trouble Nasi Jenny, co pick 6 some shell money, co kanda, using the Jani, that dinner in it, or sometimes Chay in the Sane, go Dana, Duni Tower, Sagi, 60 in a co. Nyamnyo yunga chigi tenjugi tekonani slavidu zane chiko chik sebaro chayungu toga ko sem nalo le kuyo teyashi toga shen tendregi peke nyamnyo sheni ke mena ane tenjugi tekonani slavidu oda di umobe ane tumoyinbe tawa chade yore sabusha yore sarshi mato dike mindoga chasanga tasum komso Yamaji to sound under the Nga, the top of in the Sigmedi, Kanda Yamno Kala Council Udivigi, Chate Yori, Didri Indu, Munachita, Sanjay Chedi, and Tasum Consul Yamajo in the do some Tambina, one a Tranegi. She Mrs. Dagal Shashana. Jondra Yodabata, and it's sort of Jenny, 다 있는 사람 줘야지. 가데 파랑가데 파라상고데 부디소 하셔야지. 뭐네 다 용야지 레샤 삼 차이고도.
So on the text Maha Satipatthana Sutta, this is a text that is very familiar to the Theravada community. And I don't think it would, it would not be necessary for me to be commenting on the specific words or sections of the text itself. One thing that I would like to share with you is that my suggestion would be to, when we look at a great scripture like this, Maha Satipatthana Sutta, for example, which presents the teachings on the 4 foundations of mindfulness, from my own personal kind of experience is that I find it really helpful to not to look at the specific teachings in their own right, in isolation. I always try to look at the great teachings of the Buddha in a broader context, where that specific teaching is coming from and what broader context that teaching is part of. So for example, the 4 foundations of mindfulness is a key practice, which is part of a larger context that is the 37 aspects of the path to enlightenment. And the 4 foundations of mindfulness is the first of the 7 sets. So you have the 4 endeavors, 5 faculties, 5 powers, the 4 limbs for concentration practice, and then you have 7 limbs of mindfulness, enlightenment, 7 factors of enlightenment, and 8 for noble path. So it's important to, even in relation to a practice of, say, 4 foundations of mindfulness, to be able to, first of all, understand it in the broader context of the 37 aspects of the path to enlightenment, which really presents the whole map of the path to enlightenment. So that, I think, is really helpful. And the other one is to really make a broader comment about generally what Dharma practice entails. Dharma practice entails, for example, in the case of the 4 foundations of mindfulness and the 37 aspects of the path to enlightenment, the first stage is the stage of learning, where we have to cultivate the understanding of the teaching by studying, by hearing, by reading. So this is the first level of understanding, referred to as understanding derived through study or learning. The second thing is, now based on what we have studied and learned, we need to now contemplate on it constantly. And so this second stage is more like processing what we have studied, what we have learned, internalizing it. And so this second level is referred to as understanding derived through critical reflection or contemplation. So this is the second level. And the third is then whatever we have understood and comprehended and processed, we then need to meditatively cultivate it, reinforce it. So the third level of understanding is the understanding derived through meditation. So in an ideal world, we should not do them one at a time. In an ideal world, we should do them in an integrated manner. So even when you are studying, you keep contemplating upon it and then immediately practice it. So if we are able to approach using the integration of study, contemplation, and meditative cultivation, then we will really begin to see a change. So what happens is that when we are able to use this kind of approach, then automatically we'll be doing this by relating to our own personal experience. So your Dharma practice does not become talking about something out there in the outside world. Your Dharma practice becomes something about your experience, your state of mind. So once you're able to relate the Dharma teachings from your own state of mind, then we really begin to see a deepening of our own conviction and ascertainment. And through understanding, conviction, and ascertainment, reinforced through constant cultivation, then we really begin to see a change in ourselves. So this is something that I, as an elder member of the Sangha, who has done some practice, can share with you, or from my own personal experience, that through this kind of approach, we can really see a change in ourselves, in our mind.
This one.
No.
Canada, Kanda Chanshu Sam, Gunduzane, so Junju, the Shivish Savurisha. Jitin Tungan Chin, take a Randon de Lechon. Jitin Dawa Chin, Shantu, take a Shanton de Lechon. Dr. Shangy Tunga, the Yada or Machana, Sanja Yutu Mirujo, Koana, Dawame. Te Young Gunse, Chanshu Sam, Tashan, then Dawa and Draw, some sushi, Kilu, say, Oda, Junju, Sigdi, never show Shivishua. Netting Yinare, some Dante. Shivishu Shavushto.
So,
the Ranashiki Tungni, Daya Qualia, Kangdus, let's see this triangle. Kangdusun, Chivanum, Transition, Dansheva, Tini Kala, Trava, Taomo, Licheva, go. Then the shadow modern, Dambashi, Wajer and the Sankishin, Mudijana, Jumbu 6, and other Sonshadi, Mayan Kolan Dardi, and Nasadi. The Kanda Chadang gets a sword the Nasadrada. And Nadi Namding is good to say in the Sane, Nathan near Medevjigi. Chayundu, Chechen, Na, any Chadang Gag, Shishing a co, any Tartan Sana, Niki Medevtel, Lia never Tobia Chile, go Pinkitua. Oh, Chasanga, Nanga, Tawanga, so Chandy, go charging, Chadam Paya Chagari, charging, Namding Rigwada, Namne Rigwa, Gulishow, Dodger Same Tensi, and then all the show, Chick to Church Tensi, Devulacho, Yemi Kingo Tensi. Then they do sometimes, Nasadi, Kenania Medevici, Chayutua. Chasanga, Dini, she Nasadigi, go charging Neko, no Jangarisha. Charging Kotuni Tawa Sam Hoyaki, Kopiki, Shimuru Chayumachi. Oh, this some, and that's something those.
So, sorry, earlier I forgot something. So to conclude, His Holiness was saying that when we are able to truly gain something as a result of our own personal experience, then even when the specific words related to a particular teaching is heard, you have a different kind of feeling when you hear the words. For example, say when we talk about the dependent origination, pratitha samuppada, or for the Tibetan Buddhist, the teaching on emptiness. So when you hear the word dependent origination, pratitha samuppada, if you don't have a deeper practice, then the words just remain words. And then maybe you will have some intellectual understanding that it is an important part of Buddhist teaching or Buddhist philosophy. But beyond that, there is no real emotion on your part. Whereas if you have done some serious practice yourself, then even when you hear the word, like pratitha samuppada or shunyata, the word will have a qualitatively different sensibility for you. The word becomes rich, the word becomes pregnant, the word becomes poignant. So there is a kind of your relationship with the word also changes. So to continue, alongside my own other practices, as I mentioned before, I'm also a great admirer of the 8th century Indian Buddhist master Shantideva. And Shantideva's teaching, particularly on cultivation of our heart, moving towards a more altruistic orientation, is a powerful one. And there are passages, for example, he says that if one is not able to exchange at a deep level, self and others, let alone attainment of Buddhahood, even in this life, there will be no happiness, no real happiness. So then he says about, therefore, by overcoming any sense of weariness, one should ride this horse of altruistic intention and travel from one place of joy to another place of joy. What intelligent person wouldn't want to embark on such a journey? So those are really powerful words. He's really kind of conveying, and this is really, I find these words very powerful and try to sort of implement them in my own life. And similarly, for example, when in relation to the teaching on shunyata, emptiness, there is a passage in Tsongkhapa's line where he talks about how dependent origination is for the unenlightened and ignorant. It's the doorway through which we go to the lower realms, because we get attached, we grasp at it, and then we create negative karma and so on. But for the wise, the truth of dependent origination opens the door to liberation. So this is a very important passage. But for me, I use it slightly in a different way. For example, I try to bring up the notion of an I, and we all know that the thought I am, this aham kara, the thought I am is often the basis of many of the problems. This grasping at I, the grasping at self, is the basis of many of the negative emotions that arises. And then, I leads to, self-centeredness, which leads to grasping, which leads to kind of attachment and so on. But at the same time, the same notion of I can be used in a constructive way for a practitioner by examining the nature of it, by engaging into a critical inquiry. For example, in Chandrakirti's text, he uses what is called the sevenfold analysis of the self, whether the self is identical with the aggregates, whether the self is person is distinct from the aggregates, whether the self resides in the aggregates, whether the aggregates possess the self, whether it is the configuration of the aggregates, or whether it is the collection of the aggregates. So there's a sevenfold analysis. So when you apply the sevenfold analysis and search what exactly is this I that I'm referring to when I think of, that I'm thinking of, we will discover that it is unfindable. When subject to such critical analysis through a sevenfold mode of analysis, we don't find self beyond our constitutive elements that make up our existence. So in this way, even though the notion of self can lead to problem by attachment, grasping, and so on, but at the same time, the fact that we have a natural sense of self allows us an opportunity to use it in a constructive way by applying critical inquiry and wisdom prajna, and discovering that there is no real basis for this strong attachment that we bring about. So in this way, the point is that the teachings of the Buddha and the Dharma teachings are not something external to our experience. The teachings are something that are relevant to our experience, and by applying it to our own states of mind and mind experience, we'll be able to gain a real change.
Now some questions.
We are indeed rejoiced at the teaching by His Holiness. And this is indeed a blessed teaching program to have the great teacher, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, to teach us this direct path to realization through the teaching of Maha Satipatthana Sutta. As His Holiness said, though we live in a multiplicity of Buddhist teachings, but the faith and devotion to the Buddhas, the cultivation of compassion and wisdom remains applicable to all Buddhist practitioners for the ultimate realization of Nibbana. For your information, His Holiness will continue delivering the same teaching on Maha Satipatthana Suttas tomorrow, the same time, Indian time, from 8 to 9 a.m. We have many questions from monastic as well as laity to ask His Holiness. But due to time constraint, we can only take a few questions, and your understanding is very much appreciated. This is a gentle reminder for questioners. When you ask the question, please unmute the mic. And after questioning, remember to mute the mic back, but keep the video open. And we shall keep the room calm and peaceful and create a conducive learning atmosphere. We may now invite Venerable Maha Satipatthana Sutta from Thailand to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
May I pay respect to Your Holiness and good morning, all Dhamma friends. I would like to ask some question. The Buddha says Satipatthana is the direct way for purification of beings, for overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for extinguishing of suffering and grief, for walking on the path of truth, and for realization of Nibbana. But in the present time, the new generation just need for overcoming trouble in their life. So how can we apply Maha Satipatthana Sutta to use in daily life, such as in situation of COVID-19? Thank you.
지금 저 강에데 태베 그들로 다디 주도 게 가제 이버디리 삼로서 고고 말봐 커두기 지 강에 태베 그들로 다지 강에 먹고지 미지소 나올 태데지 이니 미밀이야 지 콘도사야 서로 차도라야 서로 나제지야 서로를 영대기도 와 다디도 또 동人都发当呢，그다 디도 사디 소스 아니 레이 왕게 요구여 왔다 레스야데 심뒤 모두고 타는 요구여 디리가 상로 망스 코레이나 아니 시 강에 체디 다는 시 밀 주고 딱 레라베 탈 밀 주고 돼야 디디 패시 연구 말에 사디지 인도 가당 알아서 안돼 되지데 지 다산지게 처리야 딘딘 동업하고 대보 딘딘 구주하고 대보 딘딘 공부하고 대보 딘딘 람하고 대보 오시니 den시송돼야 디디기 도시 den시 모는 대보 차와는 대보 차와 제부터 잡을 대보사 대수체도 도 상도스 예배이나 에네 아주 강에 제주잖아요 지금 남상식 섬이야 공주사가 서로 지금 중요하고 서로 어디도 배치 매용을 해서 쉬우켜봐도.
This is your question is very true because for most people, in their day-to-day life, when they encounter difficulties such as adverse situation, tragedy, and so on and so forth, very rarely people are able to, create the space to actually understand what are the causes and conditions behind the situation. People tend to choose an easy path, which is to immediately blame others and latch on to whatever conditions they think is responsible. And because many of the problems arise as part of our being in a society, our tendency would be immediately to blame someone else. And so here, there's a kind of for a lot of people, there's a natural tendency to immediately react and choose a shortcut and try to find someone to blame your problem at. So through practices such as through the Satipatthana teachings and more broadly the teachings on the Four Noble Truths that the Buddha has given, it can really make a difference, because one of the things that the Buddha's teaching in these texts, scriptures tell us is the importance of contemplation, to observe, to reflect, so that you don't immediately react in an impulsive way. So when you observe and contemplate in a deeper way, you really begin to see the causes and conditions that are part of it. So that's why, for example, one of the basic teachings of the Buddha is that to a large extent, our suffering and happiness is a function of our state of mind. And to an extent, there's the karmic function of karma involved, but most importantly, our own suffering and happiness is determined by or influenced deeply by the state of mind we have. If we are able to create a more peaceful state of mind, it creates a space for joy and resilience and able to deal with difficult situations. But if our state of mind is disturbed and undisciplined, agitated, then it leads to more problem. So the state of mind, the happiness and suffering to a large extent is a consequence and function of our state of mind. So by paying attention, creating the space, it really makes a big difference. And here, the most important teachings for the Buddhist from this broader perspective is to cultivate an outlook that deeply takes into account the teachings of the Four Noble Truths. The Buddha said, this is the truth of suffering. This is the truth of the origin of suffering. This is the truth of the cessation of suffering. And this is the truth of the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. So in this, there is the most important teaching is the teaching on cause and effects, and encompassed in the Four Noble Truths. So when we are able to, deeply reflect and integrate these teachings, then we will be able to create a sort of an outlook, a state of mind, and an approach where we will not react in a kind of a immediately reactive manner. And when we are encountering a suffering or a tragedy, we wouldn't respond as if we are shocked that, how can this happen to me kind of thing. So we would not respond in this way because we will be able to have a deeper understanding of the situation. So in this way, I think the Buddha's teaching can really help to create a more open, spacious, resilient mind so that one can be able to deal with immediate challenges in a more constructive way.
산지선데 담바시스 동에다고 구조다고 고고다고 남지 담바스니 송샤 지주차기 또서 거를 쉬어이나 애는 아주 다대변은 내양 그 서로 들어가게 태베 그들이 그 섬나로 다 교도 깨는 때네 난기 규진 치 규진 망구수수 연구여서 삼고도 남사직 섬을 빼야지 해로 토르대야지 배지 용말 봐. 다 들어가게 태베 그들이야 참반이 샤근데 치들지 말라위나 어떤 천을 들으셔야 쓰니 샤샤가 리기요래 그 시제 거야 오지 마잖아 지금도 이게電子수야데 뺏겨서 버려셔 아니 고베다 보셔야 되기 저상어 디르고도 가 동에다부터 꾸주다부 디치고 셈 슌데야 계셔 말이 고베다 보셔야지 요래스잖아 다 딘지 땡인도잖아 디 톱지게 람지 템포디 세주시야
So if we are able to, as I said before, really kind of internalize the teachings, the significance of the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, then we begin to appreciate the complexity of causes and conditions behind many factors. So for example, in the case of COVID situation, for someone who has this ability to appreciate the complex causes and conditions, then such a person would not react to the immediate threat in a very shocking way, because one will have the understanding there are internal causes and external causes and conditions, and then one will seek the necessary avoidance that is important part of protecting oneself, and then not emotionally react in a negative way to challenges, so that one can continue to maintain their own peace of mind. If on the other hand, if someone has not internalized these teachings on the cause and effect, like as in the Four Noble Truths, then even if we ask that person to recite part of a holy scripture, like say, for example, from the Satipatthana Sutta, then that person, because the mind is agitated, will not really benefit even from hearing an important part of a passage as well. So this, I personally feel that the teachings embodied in the Four Noble Truths is a truly, truly profound one and an important one.
Thank you. The next question.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. And His Holiness was saying that, one of the beautiful things about teachings on Four Noble Truths is that although it begins with the truth of suffering and the origin of suffering, which is the story of the problem, but it's not meant there for us to become discouraged and demoralized, because it's followed by the third noble truth, which is the truth of cessation. And then the truth of cessation shows us the possibility of a freedom, and that is a source of really great hope. And when we are able to understand that there is a possibility of cessation, then the interest arises in finding out what is the path that leads to the cessation. So the psychology behind the Four Noble Truths teaching is a beautiful one.
Okay, so thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Venerable Dr. Prak Maha Sompong Santachitto from Thailand to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Good morning, Your Holiness and friend in the Dharma. Your Holiness, as we know, Buddhism has several traditions, and the emphasis is also differently placed. How do we integrate or interpret Maha Satipatthana to the modern peoples and non-religious believers? Thank you.
Sanjebe Chevachik Gune and the Samtana, the Jundendegi, any Tenshi Shongoda, any Parvatinim Shongoda, any Lagua number Cheve Shongosa, Dirigi, Jundendegi Ka, Tachabujori, the Zuche Dawes, Lojunche, Guru Dosiana, any Maranzuda, the number Nanzazu, she Shamu Sushi Dhammaduta, she Tulu Dhammaduta, the Dig, some Gitane, any, the Ngay Chuyu, the Chenzu Chuyu said today, Shayake Deomari. So then they get Tenshi the Sambe Chu Sung Shava, the Yidi, Goroji, Pa Kor Jivina, any Cheta Mendoza, Shirashati, Nanzu, any Chenzu Chusa, Yawacha, Medeva Chigita, Sanjay Chava Nazar Data. What did it? That Delia in Chamanisha do that the other native Tondia Chigdi Galonta, Kanshi Champan Yawar Shaka Shivun Didani, Simjan Nam, number Tapper Cheva, Nyangeda, Mangan Dumba Nam, Shibur Cheva, Dungeta, Yi Medewano Yawar Cheva, Dampo Tower Cheva, Nyangde Mundu Cheva, Di Tamji Chedo, Dravachik Lami knows, Shanti Dom Chobu Sungdua. Cheta Kanda, Ji, Jimdendegi Chulu Sawalo, could Judah, Dribu Namiton, Sunzane, any Dugun Nietzsche, any Golam Nietzsche, Denshisunyadi, Shujun Dom Choborisha.
So, for us, of course, you're right that among the followers of the Buddha, there are many different traditions. For example, when we talk about the Buddha's turning of the wheel of Dharma, some traditions speak about 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. The first turning of the wheel of Dharma, which is focused on the teachings of the Four Noble Truths. Second turning of the wheel of Dharma, where the key sutras were the perfection of wisdom teachings, primarily focused on emptiness. And then the third turning is the turning that involves sort of further interpretation of the second turning. So, so there's definitely a diversity among the followers of the Buddha's teaching. But as I mentioned before, the main framework of the Buddha's teaching is really enshrined in the teachings of the Four Noble Truths. That is really the basic framework of the Buddha's teaching. So once we are on our part, whatever traditions we may belong to, if we are able to deeply appreciate the significance and the profound meaning of the Four Noble Truths, then we will be able to really relate to other fellow Buddhist traditions as well, without feeling any strong partisanship, differences that may be based on different color of hat or different colors of robes that one tradition may be adopting, but we'll be able to feel a sense of affinity across all the followers of the Buddha's teaching. So that, I think, is an important one. And I keep saying that the Four Noble Truths teaching is a foundational and the main frame. And here, for example, in the Satipatthana Sutta, Buddha presents a very, a comprehensive summary of the efficacy of the path. When he says, here monks, there is amongst in this one way to the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and distress, for the disappearance of pain and sadness, for the gaining of the right path, and for the realization of Nibbana. So in this, single passage, Buddha really sums up the heart of what the path, Dhamma, is supposed to lead us to. And that really is the essence of the practice of Dhamma, the aim of the goal of Dhamma and the practice of Dhamma. And the Four Noble Truths offers us really a powerful framework, because suffering and origin are one set of cause and effect, and cessation and path are another set of cause and effect. And in these two sets of cause and effect, there is a very, very comprehensive and a grand synthesis of the entirety of the Dhamma there.
Yeah. Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Venerable Pragmaha Navin Arunrat from Thailand to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Good morning. Respect to the laws of Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. Respect to His Holiness and all Dhamma friends. Today, I would like to ask His Holiness, what is different between Maha Satipatthana Sutta in Theravada and Mahayana? Thank you so much.
对我常不说人我举没得，给你的带汤没用了，哎，心就钱没用，这上个，哎，我不是得有的 ，I don't know, sorry.
So to be honest, because the Maha Satipatthana Sutta was originally not translated into Tibetan, I have not had the chance to read it. So, I have to say that there is no, I haven't been able to compare. So my only response is, I don't know.
Okay. Now next.
Thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Venerable Narangoda Paluwe Dhammadina Thero from Sri Lanka to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Dharamsala, Patipujaniya Dalai Lama Nayak Mahipanan Wahanse Pradhana Vitwat Sambhavaniya Sabhavan Avasarai Buddhadasa Indapanno Pera Satipatthana පිළිබඳ වූ දැනුම මත මලගෙදරකදී පවා ඒ භාවිතයට ගත්තා වර්තමානයේ ඒ ගිලිහීමට හේතු මොනවාද? පෙරවන් සරණ ස්තුතියි.
记得没装备可多了呀，反正都这半年下手了嘛，这短不赢呢，哎，现在这个产短用个要了，哎，那商业被去个 간다지 취지 먹고 싶다는데 대삼기 그 간다 대부 남시 벌시 저와 여대비네 즉 고대야지 편도된데 요리 아니 된 대중 침배 지 가서 그래 김상금 미소다 지 얘네 정부 전지서에 너의 책도 거기나 양 섬나를 도시 시디 영향을 근데 변도 요리.
So definitely the practice of chanting suttas, sacred sutras like Maha Satipatthana Sutta as part of the funeral rite can be very beneficial. For example, in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, there is the concept of intermediate state, Andhra Bhavana. And during the intermediate state, the deceased, there is a chance that when family members, the loved ones, are thinking about the deceased and dedicated to the deceased well-being, a sutta is cited. And especially a great sutra like the Maha Satipatthana Sutta, will contain a lot of references to the Blessed One, our teacher Buddha, as well as many precious words from the sacred scripture. So there is a chance, there is a likelihood that the deceased consciousness, which may be there before connecting with the rebirth, has a chance to hear. And then more immediately, it will give an opportunity for the grieving family to be able to find some peace, because the focus will be on listening to the chanting of the sutta and being able to even pay some attention in the moment of grief to teachings like the Satipatthana Sutta will have a real immediate impact of creating some peace and comfort for the grieving family as well. So I think it is really a good practice.
Any persi.
치시.
그래.
치시.
치시.
지시바. 치시바 지시바 지올레마.
전에 오다 아니 간다 넘버십 써야지 그 수글레 그 지기 요마레 그런 넘버십 써야지 그 뭐고 간다 가네네 그런 예랭이 주지 그거 열어 저 예랭스를 그 릭침베 주지기 저상가 시바 세상 릭섬 되기 예랭이 주디 그 릭침베 주타는 드라마도 류디 아니 시바 시 공에 시바 담르지야 그 주르치기 어디 이루 넘버십디 코라 이루 균 코레 때문에 연구하시기 근데 인도산에 아주 미시베 쇼리아 퍼시스야디 그 용되기 열에 아니 디디디 자 그나 풍부님버디 패지 파주시버 순등에 되게 풍부님버디 통야 패지 이해돼 봐 아니 디 종종의 되게 지 대축 선들도 스타바이나 아니 퍼시디기 고야다 통야 유도버지기 편도 유도버지기 된지지.
So in the Sarvastivada Abhidhamma, there is an explanation of the four aspects or four stages of existence. One is the birth, the second one is the life in between, and the third one is the death, and the fourth one is intermediate state. So intermediate state is the stage in between two rebirths, two births. Underlying this concept of four stages of existence is the understanding that fundamentally human consciousness, not human, the consciousness and body are two separate streams that make up our existence. Human existence is composed of body and mind, but body and mind are two fundamentally different streams of continuity of existence. So when a body ceases, when someone dies, the body ceases, but not the consciousness, because the continuity of the consciousness is rooted upon the successive continuation of the same kind. And this is part of the Buddhist causation theory, where only like things can produce like things. So matter cannot produce consciousness, and consciousness cannot produce matter, even though they can be cooperative conditions with each other. For example, for human mind, aspects of our sensory experiences that are contingent upon physical organs may have some immediate connection to the body, but the deeper manas, the mental level consciousness, is independent of the body. So the continuity of that will carry on. So after the person is deceased, even though the continuity of the body, the consciousness in the body has ceased, but consciousness before taking rebirth, before connecting to a new birth, is still present. So that's one of the reasons why when chantings of sutta and sacred texts are done in the memory and for the dedication of the deceased, there is the possibility that the deceased consciousness can actually have some ability to hear. And there are also suggestions that in some cases, the deceased consciousness can also see, perceive their own old body and being there. So in any case, these kind of practices as part of a funeral rite is actually very beneficial.
Pena persi da jar chi milam glu sach azun ju milam ta me khodo lo chi mi ring ga she de chue jang bu de mar da ko ren xin gi dang me pa cha de de yin wo milam glu 풍부 니 뭐 le ko so lo su chen de de yo de ge do ga ne ngo shi bu de de yi o de milam glu ene 풍부 니 뭐 le ba lo su chen ne ene 야 디 연유기 정보 침주주 가르치기 미즈제 밀는 그 류디가 통돼야 되는데 되게 뭐시 버든지 그 시야 좀 재산급변은 벌써 서로지 밀는 그 류사디 도스코 술도 봐 턴체 어디는 신 밀는 그 류디 그 풍부님 벌레 봐 아니 로스 체니 그 저되게 열어 어디를.
So the concept of this intermediate state can be understood by way of an example of a phenomenon that is not that uncommon. And this phenomenon is what is referred to as the dream body. So there are a few individuals, it's not necessarily a consequence of some yogic high practice, advanced practice. For some individuals, it can happen naturally. But there are instances where individuals are able to maintain awareness by adopting a dream body, and they have this unique phenomenological experience of being able to actually observe things around in a dream body and then later report it. So what is happening in the intermediate state is somewhat similar to this phenomenon of a dream body.
그 정신기야 가셔 다 뭐면 박자 얘기를 야 밀음글루 수도 정해진지 용기요래 야 알아서 곰점니 밀음글루 수도 치야 된대 세상에 점점니 아니 밀음글루 파 수도 풍부님 벌 로스 파체니 로봇은 통말로 세상에 밀음글루 송나 소바치야 약수도 배제들이셨어.
So these phenomena in the cases where it naturally happens are not really a result of some advanced practice. Some people are able to do it, and then they report their phenomenological experience. But there are also practices which actually are called dream yoga, and the dream yoga, through dream yoga, some advanced yogis can actually consciously assume dream body and then actually have the phenomenon and the experience of that phenomena. So because of this, and I do know one or two individuals who actually have that capacity. So, and I was, sometimes I joke saying that if someone can have that ability to adopt dream body, then this could be a very powerful way of, becoming a spy, because people, other than oneself, others cannot observe that dream body. It's very subjective and internal. So the person can still, being able to travel around. So it's the best form of spy could be someone who has that capacity of assuming dream body.
Now next, that's how we know. Now next question.
Thank you, His Holiness. We still remain two more questions. So we now invite Venerable Indu Ragari Vipasitero from Sri Lanka to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Dalai Lama Maha Swamin Wahanse ඇතුළු සම්භාවනීය මහා සංඝරත්නයෙන් මගේ ප්‍රශ්නය තමයි ආනාපාන සති භාවනාව සම්පූර්ණයෙන්ම වඩනකොට සතිපට්ඨානය වැඩෙනවද? එසේනම් කොහොමද ආනාපාන සති භාවනාවෙන් සතර සතිපට්ඨානය වැඩෙන විදිහ පොඩ්ඩක් පැහැදිලි කරලා දෙන්න.
세상 거 중국마 현인도산에 지용으로 걸어야 애는 전번이샤시 애는 류 전번이샤 섬 전번이샤 애는 쉐 전번이샤 애는 가서 초 전번이샤 초 전번이샤스네 고 전번이샤 시스네 남샤든지 수용 그 요래 애는 디나네도 우 전번이샤 애는 다 되게 안돼 쉬야들이 그때기 전번이 시작은 누구로도 처로 심어이나 애네 가서서네 심 전번이 시작 쇼로 처로 심어이나 애네 풍분히 원래 고소 로스 치야든지 용식을 봐 어떻게 저래서 고정다 잡으시래
So the four foundations of mindfulness is a very well-known teaching where the cultivation of mindfulness is applied to four specific objects. These are body, feeling, mind, and mental objects or mind objects. So that's the broad teachings of cultivation of mindfulness. And mindfulness of breathing is part of that. And so in the four foundations of mindfulness, what we see is a progressively movement from body, feeling, mind, and mental objects. So once one is able to deepen the ability to place one's mind and abide mindfully, beginning with body and so on, and especially in the context of in relation to mind, taking the third object, then one will be able to gain mastery over one's states of mind as well. To the point, some of these yogic abilities could be achieved as well, such as dream yoga.
알조다 아다 뇌중내 세르랑게 야마레 나가 중내 애니 시와 차라 먹고 숨고도가 사다딩 안서 치워서 거리야 용야게 낭지 톱스 세디 지tum으로 지기 니쿠 거도를 연구요래 내가서 뭐쳐 돼야지 쟤네 아니 치워서도 니지워서서네 들 숨고도가
So it's, although it is not that explicit in the sutta teachings with relation to the nature of mind, although there is the application of mindfulness on mind, but it is in the Vajrayana teachings we see more detailed and explicit explanations about the different levels of subtlety of mind and subtlety of consciousness. And this is, in this context, we also speak of the consciousness during the waking state, consciousness during the sleeping state, dream states, and so on. Progressively, the sleeping state is subtler than the waking state, and dreaming state is subtler than the waking state, and deep sleep state is subtler than the dreaming state. So, and in this context, there is a reference to a pure luminosity, luminous nature of the mind, and the subtlemost luminous state arises at the point of death. So there are specific techniques and practices in the Vajrayana teachings where yogi cultivates to attain these deeper states of consciousness and deliberately cultivate this luminous or clear-light state of mind.
나디 나가 슌드 나로래 세우도가 사슈르팀 춘메르팀 메룬르팀 루남실르팀 남신 난가르팀 수르자네 에네 동보시디 샤용구요레 사다디 태윈르자네 미규도 도도 카나메히도 사게 나와든데 차용하지 에네 베나 어디 슈고다 샤바라보디르 파 템차르 제라 에네 뉴월 해지지 베서 참모드 간래 연드 에네 나와 체바 토바니 토사게 또디 에네 가소레 탐지도 뭐 세샤야게 공리야 어디 난치 토스um 사디 샤지 용기여라 다 나로 참으로 시골이 에네 안다 조단도 또스 규유이나 에네 치워 생고도 집에 그도 다 안다 나와 쳐봐 나왔냐토 에네 어디도 서도 사버지기 모셔버지기 다들 모트야라 니유에서 쓰면 되기 에네 그 지금 먼저 정다서로 차대요래 어디르셔.
So in these teachings, the Vajrayana teachings, we also see descriptions of the different stages of the dissolution that happens, particularly at the point of death. So these the 4 stages of the dissolution of the body, the 4 elements: earth, water, fire, wind, and then finally the wind dissolves into consciousness, and consciousness into space. And these, the last stage of the dissolution, so each of these stages of dissolution are correlated with external and internal signs that the person will experience. And especially the final stage of dissolution, where consciousness dissolves into space, there are furthermore 4 levels of 4 stages referred to as the appearance, increased appearance, attainment, and clear light. So we are progressively now dissolving into subtler states and so on. So the final stage is the clear light of death. So, and this is what the yogi is training. And of course, all of us will one day have to go, and we will be confronted with the experience of death. So for the yogi, the opportunity is to cultivate awareness so that when the person yogi is going through the different stages of dissolution, one is able to recognize, now I'm at this stage, now I'm at this stage. And to be able to maintain awareness in the naturally occurring dissolution processes, what is needed is to train ourselves. And the dream yoga is a way of training. And part of that in our training involves, first of all, being able to cultivate lucid dreaming so that you recognize dream as dreams. And so the dream yoga, dream stage, provides us an opportunity to cultivate that kind of recognition of the different levels of subtlety of consciousness.
Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. So this is the last question. We now invite Venerable Bhadra Budi from Indonesia to ask your questions to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Thank you so much for the chance. I respect to His Holiness, all vulnerables and participants that I really respect. I was very happy when listening the material about Satipatthana explained. But I have a unique question. What is the best way to train Satipatthana in our daily life as monk and members of Sangha itself? Thank you.
Tadi, rāngi kelōngi sāmbā, tīndrī kita, pīkē chāmbā di, mīlum sūnshē liyā, pīkē gyōndēndu, pē shūk shāmbō shē tēyā shūmbō yīna, mīlum sūnshē liyā, kāndā chī, chī pāmlā kī nyebā mākō yā kē. Oda dīgi pāndā yārwa, kā tī gyōndēne, ngā kelōngi sāmbā di, 세두기 내가 저도 마세베 니두기 내가 에네 그 디거로도 고마주나 수고 벌쓰기 내가래 나 결론이 사버디 다 결론도 패시다 그 간다 풍부 디파 식사를 제일 시야도야 가고르디 얘네 수순 두시르디 나 결론이 사ben 두시디 레토그로 어디르리샤.
So for the monastic members, one of the most important practice is to really constantly cultivate the mindful awareness of the thought that I'm a bhikshu, I'm a monk. And this awareness, this mindful awareness of yourself as a bhikshu and your strong identification with that is really helpful, so that not only during the waking moments of your life, that mindfulness of yourself as a bhikshu will serve as the broader context in which you engage in your everyday activity, but you should cultivate to a point where even in your dream, when you are dreaming something tempting, the thought mindfulness will arise. No, I'm a monk. I'm a bhikshu. So if you are able to really cultivate your awareness and mindfulness of yourself as a bhikshu at that level, that will really help bringing mindfulness into many aspects of your everyday life. And then His Holiness was saying that, if that awareness is very strong, one may even be able to bring it into the intermediate state as well, even though there is no physical body. So in a technical sense, you're not a bhikshu anymore, but still that awareness that I'm a monk will be a powerful one.
소다기 배나 년세 나올래 아니 셀 레버 템포 아니 후 가서 호신이 셀 때가 그러다 제가 하던 뒤에 나로 지 4년 지금 도 거두이네 지금도 전시 돼야지 송구도가 어딘지 들으셔.
So for example, yeah.
주주로서 나방아 눈에 다대 제방아 애네 가서 가다 소다가 예제기 로다 시사되기 뒤균되네 전시도 돼야지 도가
So if you look at the precepts that make up the monastic vows of a fully ordained bhikshu, we will see that many of the secondary precepts are connected with our everyday behavior, everyday conduct of sleeping, walking, eating, and resting, and so on and so forth. So we don't want to go into the details of the exact precepts specific to what kind of action we are, but the point is there are these precepts. And what this is suggesting is the importance of maintaining mindful awareness throughout your daily activities. For example, we speak of 4 main, kind of activities: sleeping, walking, eating, and and then resting. So these 4 main activities, we are advised to bring both mindfulness as well as meta-awareness, or clear knowing, as it is translated sometimes, but meta-awareness, so that you bring mindfulness where you are maintaining your awareness, but there is also a secondary level of meta-awareness, so that you are able to monitor your own behavior. So this combination of mindfulness and clear knowing or meta-awareness is something that needs to be brought into everyday behavior and intention and thought. And that's one of the reasons why the monastic vows are so detailed. There are specific precepts pertaining to specific aspects of our activity. And what this emphasis shows us is the important role mindfulness and samprajñana, the clear awareness, really plays in our everyday life.
Okay, next. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Oh,
thank you. His Holiness, we have come to an end of our Day 1 teaching program by His Holiness. Indeed, we have a wonderful and fruitful day for listening to the Dharma talk at the right time and associating with the wise, the great teacher, and more importantly, irrespective of traditions and lineage and background that we are all coming from, His Holiness has shown us his living of an exemplary spiritual life, motivating us to walk the path of full realization. So let us join palm together to express our gratitude to the great masters, His Holiness, and of course, all audience worldwide online, and rejoice by saying 3 times in the Buddha's own word, Sadhu, Sadhu, Sadhu. We'll see you tomorrow, the same time. Sabbe sattva sukhita hontu. May all beings be well and happy. Sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu,
Sadhu. Thank you.
Tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.